Hi, I'm John DeArmond.
And I'm Edward.
And we're with the Coquille Valley Sword Group. And today we're talking about the application for the Mojirigamae kata. We mentioned this in the last video, but where Sasen is the embodiment of our heiho, of the strategy of Musashi and our school, Mojirigamae is the kind of embodiment of the physical kenjutsu work, the actual swordsmanship, the technical work, if you will, that we do. So it's really important to know. As such, this video is going to be a little bit longer. If it goes too long, we'll split it into two. We'll see how it goes. So we're going to start off and just demonstrate the kata one more time to refresh your memory. I'll play the role of Shidachi. Edward will be Uchidachi.
Oh, man.
It's gonna be one of those days.
Oh, man.
So now what we'll do is we'll break down each of the parts of the kata, both the direct application and the whole application bit by bit, starting with the stepping. Let's start by looking at the beginning of the kata, specifically the first interaction. So I've taken up Mojirigamae and Uchidachi's coming. Now, for him to be able to hit me, he has to clear this out of the way. Now, there are lots of ways to go about this. But for the sake of the kata, Uchidachi is just trying to strike it down and thrust in. So if Eddie's in Mojirigamae, right? Wa-da-da, right? He's using his tip to hold me in abeyance. As I move around, he shuffles his position. If I try something other than trying to knock his tip out of the way. For instance, if I'm coming in, he can use his taitsubaki to really start to put me in a way that's uncomfortable. It's hard for me to work. So I'm basically forced to work on his sword first. And that's part of why we're putting it out there, is this, where Chudan is more of a holding a person at bay with the idea of building time for yourself. Mojirigamae, the actual kamae, it is the opposite kind of mindset. Yes, I'm holding him off, but I'm holding him off in a way that limits his options. He has to work on this. So again, if he's in Mojirigamae, right, ideally, what we're looking for is that kind of motion, right, to where I clear his sword out, pa 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 pa, striking his ji or his shinogi ji, and following straight in. There are, of course, other ways of dealing with this. If the person is fidgety, right, you can start to tease them and compel their motion, whether using seme or something akin to a feint, right? A big motion that drives their work to follow it. Remember in Kyoho, we don't have, we we don't believe in feints in the way that Western martial artists tend to think of them, which is to say an attack that isn't real. For us, our feint is still a real attack, right? We're still thinking, but we're just prepared that we assume that the attack is not going to succeed, that they're going to do something. Now, if they don't do anything, of course they still get cut by it. But our work is to plan to work behind their time. In other words, I'm cutting, and he goes to clear this somehow. And I've already got it in my mind that as he comes around, I'm just going to make an ukanagashi type release, bump, bump, bump. Right? So this Mojirigamae position is quite strong. Not just because it limits their options, but because it forces the interaction. And that may seem like the same thing, but it's not quite exactly. In other words, if I'm here, he can't wait around, right? Because if I step in, I'm just going to choke him up. Even if he's in, say, a forward position like Chudan, right? I can still just ride into it. So he can't wait around for this to happen. He's got to attack. Even if he's moving defensively, he's got to work on my sword. So it's a very powerful position, but it takes a little bit of play to really get a sense for why it's powerful and how to sort of leverage that power against your partner. Whereas positions like Hasso or Wakigamae or even Chudan to a lesser extent are very straightforward. You pick it up and you go, oh, okay, well, I can do this. So let's talk about this first interaction, right? I'm in Mojiri, and he's coming to clear out. Bam. This is his goal in the kata, is to strike this down, bam, and thrust. You notice that on this cut down, he's not taking his sword very low, right? There's this sense that beginners have often in any kind of suppressive work that you have to kind of like drive it down. And this is not the case. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in just a second. But for right now, he's making the motion, and I'm coming out of the way. Now, the important part here is not Kissakigaeshi. It is not this Kissakigaeshi. Kaeshi, the K becomes a G as it becomes conjuncted, right? Kissakigaeshi, to circle the tip. The important part is where you can't see, or where he can't see easy. What do I mean by that? Of course, ideally, we're fighting using Enzan no Metsuke, eyes of the distant mountain. We're working with that relaxed peripheral vision. We're not trying to pick out, we're not trying to read what his shirt says. We're trying to see everything in our field of view. But in reality, I have forced him to have to kind of pay attention to this a little bit. Now, if his skill level is very low, he's just really going to lock onto it. If his skill level is higher, of course, he can extend it out. But in either case, he has to aim for it. He has to focus on it a little bit. And because I've brought it up here, up into where kind of his central focus is.
Very threatening.
It is, right? And that's not to say that my sword is at head level, but that it's at this throat level. It's like if you go hiking and someone tells you, okay, well, be careful of rattlesnakes. You know the danger's there, and even if you don't see it, the fact that you can't see it immediately causes you more bother, right? And so you're kind of, you spend more focus. It draws more tension into your heart. It's the same way with these kamae that point at the throat, because they're just a little bit hard to see. They're just slightly in this range that's not directly in your field of view. So it's disconcerting, right? So what's going on here? Imagine I have my sword out. How am I evading this? right? It's this step, right? Boom. I'm going from where he's cutting me to step off the line, right? And it's a very, very small step. I mean, I'm just bringing it in line with my back foot.
Don't overstep.
And I'm not really, I'm not shifting my shoulders at all. So the motion is very hidden because, again, his field of view is all up here. And we've talked about this a little bit, but when you start to shift and you create visual contrast for the person, they pick up on those visual cues faster. It lets their brain know, hey, there's something here, the situation's changed, I have to adapt, I have to spend time. Now sometimes that's really important to make sure that they see you so that they do spend that extra time so you can spend that time that they're processing to get your work done. But in this type of defensive work, right, you want to be real quiet with your motions, real hidden, real subtle, right? It doesn't take a lot. Now, we mentioned that Mojirigamae does not have a mirrored. In other words, the next kata is not Mojirigamae, but to the other side. You know, it breaks the pattern. And while that is true, it can also be misleading. In other words, the next kata that we do, Haritsuke, right? We're going to take that same step, that same sort of half of the step that we would take in Ukinagashi. So in Ukinagashi, we take our steps 1, 2, 3, 4, and now it's time for us to step off the line. We do it with that back foot. Bump, big hip turn, big body turn, koshimi hanmi. Here, we're here, bump. And we're making the same kind of step, but with the front foot. Just as you would imagine, the syllabus, the kata syllabus is not laid out sort of willy-nilly. Everything is ordered with reason, right? It builds up from big and easy motions like, oh, I step forward with my front foot and my back foot, to, oh, well, now I'm going to cross step, to, oh, now I'm going to do this same cross step, but with half the time, half the distance, so twice as fast, right? It's useful to study how the kata are put together and how the difficulty increases, how new curriculum is added to it, so that you can get a better sense for what is the lesson that is trying to be driven home here. Otherwise, if you just practice a thing to practice it like, oh, well, this is kata 4, it exists in a vacuum by itself, and I practice kata 4, and that's it, you'll have a hard time, especially if you're training on your own away from an instructor, getting to the meaning, right? Getting to the core of the kata. But I digress. So, this first interaction, I'm cutting off his options, I'm forcing him to act, and I'm choosing to act in this kind of timing. Now, with all the kata we've done so far, we've worked in 3 different sets of timing. We've worked before the opponent, we've worked at the same time as the opponent, we've worked after the opponent. In this kata, in the actual kata example, we are working at the same time as him, right? It doesn't mean we can't work after, and it doesn't mean we can't work before, but we'll show that in the next section. Let's go ahead and look at the next interaction in the kata, the follow-up. So, I've stepped out of the way of the sword and I've made this Kissakigaeshi motion, right? What I'm doing here, this suppression. Suppression and suppressive technique is not unique to Kyoho. It happens in a lot of styles, and it's a very common way because it's kind of a smart thing to do. If the person comes to hit you, right, and you just knock their sword away, you haven't fundamentally altered their posture, right? Even if you're quite forceful, their form is still the same, which means that the platform by which they launch their attacks at you hasn't been disturbed, so it's easy for them to rekey onto your position and rebut you, right? With suppression, you're changing the dynamic. I'm gonna suppress here a little bit. When you suppress a person, go ahead, shoot on. Right. Right. You draw their posture off, right?
You shake the house.
Yeah, yeah. Now, there's a lot of work like this, but this is a good example of work that you're really not going to understand it, not even intellectually, until you feel it, right? Until you have been suppressed, right? And you feel that full body jerk as though someone's trying to peel you off your toes. Obviously, if you don't have an instructor, which is why you're watching YouTube videos about it, you just have to really play with it. I can give you pointers, but once you feel it, then you'll really have that path, like, oh, this is what that guy was talking about. This is how I can accomplish it. But 4 pointers, again, I'll go off to this offside. What we want to do is we want to get their sword right about in the middle, right? Too far this way, and they tend to come off of it, right? Either we're falling off of the sword because they're not holding the form, or they change their form, like if he was pulling up into Ukinagashi.
Oh my goodness. Brain fart.
Parry.
Parry?
Yeah. Boom. And it rides off, right? So up here is not real great. Down here, you think, oh, well, if this area is bad because he can evade it, then hitting him in sort of the strong of his sword would be better. I mean, it's closer to his form, right? If I hit it, it's more jarring. And this would be true, except what tends to happen when you strike a person here, right? One, it's because you're too far out to actually cut them, right? So you're not hitting with that sort of middle section of your sword, but rather at the tip. When you try and suppress with just the tip, your success is not very high. It just doesn't have the same presence or weight of communication into their sword. It does more damage, but your goal isn't to damage here. It is to break their structure, right? So when I hit here, I tend to be in bad form, right? Because if I was in a position where I could hit with good form, of course I just cut into the dude, which is what the suppressions model. And we'll talk about that in a second. But let's say that I don't know this. I've only ever done the kata as the katas are done, and I think, okay, this is what I come to do. As I come here and hit, it doesn't have the same suppressive effect. It doesn't peel him forward. It presses into his hands. If he doesn't know how to respond to this type of pressure. If he does, he can start to cut into me here, right? By changing his orientation, right? This is one of the few times that you would actually use your tsuba, your sword guard, as a guard against somebody else's sword, rather than a safety stop to keep your own hand from sliding down onto it.
More like a little edge to keep the sword where it needs to be, right?
Kind of, yeah. Yeah, you're not actually trying, it's not as though he's cutting and this is the tsuba and he's just going to block that with his, that's not what they're designed
More
to
like
do.
An emergency safety guide.
Yeah, it's, yeah. So, this is bad because you tend to fall off. This is bad because you can't hit in the right section, and if you do, they're just going to carve into you. That's not going to save them. They're still going to likely die even from your flappy, panicked death throws, but it doesn't matter if you're dead, right? At least not now. You know, the samurai might have had a different feeling on the matter, right? But remember, if you die, you can only take the head you were taken, right? But if you live, you have many more heads to take. So, you know, perspective. So, where do we want to hit? The ideal place is in the sort of center mass of his sword, right? We're going to hit at right around the balance point of his sword with right around the balance point of our sword, right? To jar. Now, as with the kata variations, there are lots of ways to do this. In our example, we show this sort of foot together position. You can also do this as part of the long step out with it on the back side of your body. You can step into Koshimi Hanmi and do it on the inside of your body. The position that you're in is not nearly as important as the relation of your force into their sword. What do I mean by that? Normally, when we cut, our force drives in this kind of line, right? Bop, 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 as we try and cut the enemy down. Here, we are very distinctly trying to press this down, not this way. People see that sort of that jar forward, and they think, oh, well, you're trying to hit and scoop that way. You will fall off the sword. You need to hit, stick, and drop their weight. Now, that dropping the weight, again, people will think, well, if I hit him, I just have to hit him hard enough to throw it off his balance, right? Bam! And they'll start coming down here. But you can see almost immediately how the interactions with our sword change. Even though I was in that good position, as I press that tip down, I pull his sword in towards me. If he steps in, he can take me easily without me having the same safety that suppression usually applies, right? So when you're doing the suppression, you're going to just kind of crotch level, right? Bum. Arms are down, sword is flat to the horizon. Not here, not there. If you have to choose, higher is better than lower because you want their sword away, but they can come off the tip of your sword and come into you almost as easy as they can come underneath to hit the femoral, right? So, nice, flat, whoop, boop, boop, this kind of motion. Now I'm hitting with the side of my sword, right? Because we're working against the soft mune, you can work with the edge of your sword, and in the beginning especially, this might be a little easier for you because you don't have to change your hand position. And while the hand position change is very small, right? I'm not even, my hand is not rotating 90 degrees. It's more like a subtle 45-degree shift, and I put my thumb on top of it. This is the same kind of hand position change as you see in European work like Zwerkau, right? Or Krumpfau also. This sort of boop. So, if that's what the suppression is, how it's done, why do we want to do it? What is the benefit, right? If he's cutting at me, right? And I suppress him here, his life is in a world of trouble. In the same way Mojirigamae focused his actions to dealing with my sword, this focuses his actions with retreating, right? He can't pull his sword up to strike me, right? Because if he does, right, of course it's going to bring the sword into his body. He can't turn and try and cut into a rising cut for that same reason. He can't work sideways because I am behind his sword. And so my camming motion will naturally lower his, which as his sword lowers, you can see it gets further away from me because it's at a long circle with the center being up at his shoulder point, right? So it really screws a person over. And that's only if you're doing the suppression proper. Now, what if we're fighting the kind of person who's like, oh, well, I don't care if I die, I'm just going to hit this dude anyway. It happens, right? The guy hits, boom, and he is just intent on hitting you anyway. You're still at this position to where you bind them up, right? To where you can control them. because you've taken this sort of dominant, smothering position. So why would you use a suppression instead of, say, a parry, like Ukinagashi, right? If he's cutting at me, and again, I use Ukinagashi, his form hasn't changed, he can work right away. If he's better than me, right, this is a losing battle, right? Because he's just going to keep attacking. I'm going to keep trying to not die, and I fall into this pit of defense. Yeah, exactly. If we start off at sort of these kind of relative skill levels, well, he takes an action, I take an action, and we've both run out of kind of the same endurance. I'm going to hit the bottom way before he does, right? And that's assuming that in his repertoire of higher skill, he doesn't have some sneaky ninja bullshit to deal with this kind of thing, which there are lots of ways to deal with someone who's just being defensive. So it's not real great. So what do? We have to take away some of his benefit. And we do that by frustrating him with these suppressions. We keep him from doing what he wants. We let him know that in every action he's making, we're going to be there to stifle it, to keep it from developing in the way that he wants. In other words, we're using what is basically a stalling tactic to erode his psychological state. And saying it in words like that makes it sound kind of trite. Like, oh, well, I'm just going to be a big, hardened-willed samurai, and that's not going to affect me. People aren't like that, right? People are like sails in a wind. They get blown this way and that way very readily, especially when their stress is already high, which, if some dude's pointing a 3-foot razor at you, you know, your stress is high. That being said, the suppression here, despite how it looks in the kata, is not the main point. The suppression, it is a skill that we are teaching, and it is a skill that is very, very useful to know. But this motion is there, once again, for the safety of our partners. What we are actually doing, 1, 2, 3 for the thrust, right, is the Kissakigaeshi motion as an attack. In other words, in that same way that the step that we're taking is half of what the Ukinagashi step is. Boom. This first motion that we're making is half of what the Ukinagashi parry is. But just as in Ukinagashi, the parry is not the point. It's to cut with every motion. So I make that same step. Pop. So in the same way, here is 1, here is half. Does this make sense? Right? 1, 2, 3. And I can follow. Ba, 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 all the way through. Now, I may break this down and not use the undercut, the overcut, and the thrust, depending on the situation. I might just use the overcut. I'll go to the other side so the camera can see. And just come into kote, come into the tendons, come into tsuigetsu, come into the throat, right? Come into his thumb.
Lots of thumbs.
Right? There's a lot of power in this motion. And I don't mean power in terms of I can hit with 10 pounds per square inch. I mean power as in a virtue that allows you to defeat your opponent, right? So whether I'm taking this undercut, and maybe I don't take it to his arms, maybe he thinks that he is going to really clear this out while he's kind of sneaking over here, right? I can work deep into the body if I need to, whether it's the brachial, whether it's underneath the dough, Again, if it's a leg, I wouldn't take the leg here in this target, just because the tendency is going to be for him to spin me because I'm catching into his hip, and I don't really want his sword coming at my back while my sword is occupied. But this idea, right, that you can cut, thrust, and really just drive the person the whole way. It harkens back to our philosophy of cutting with every motion. It's, you know, the underneath beating the overtop. It's everything that we do strategically, but it's the mechanic by which we do it. The physical, like, oh, this kind of technique is how we're working. So it should be evident by now that where your feet are, they matter, but only so far in terms of ma'ai to your opponent, relationship, timing, and distance, right? Whether your feet are together, close to the enemy, or open to the enemy, it doesn't really matter so much. So if I'll be on the opposite side again, if he cuts and I cut him in this position, that's fine, right? Or I can come with feet together, or I can come so that my hips are close to his, right? All of them will work. And the kata have been slowly building you up so that you use all of these different body positions throughout your work. So, for whatever reason, there is a sense in, or at least there seems to me, observing people speak online, or to see their work, see them talk about their work, there's this idea that some of the kata pieces are supposed to be like special moves. Like sasen, let's say, is a good example, right? Like, oh, I have used the special move, sasen. I have come to my perfect sasen position with my perfect orientation, and I have struck in that perfect target in that perfect timing. I have used the technique sasen, as though it was like some sort of video game, you know, down over AB, right? This is a misunderstanding, right? At least in Hyoho. I can't speak to other styles, of course. If me winning the fight depended on me executing some kind of super specialized, read is precise, technique, I have to manipulate the entire battle, not just to my advantage, but to a place where I can use this technique, right? It's unrealistic, right? Instead, you have to understand that sasen is not this, right? This is the form by which we teach sasen. Sasen is seizing the initiative, right? It's the pointing finger that leads the way. And we've talked about this in the application videos a little bit, but it's really important. If you're not thinking about your sword work, then you're not building good work. You're not building adaptive work. You're not deepening your own understanding of your own work, right? And it's silly. So, to review, the Kissakigaeshi motion, the circular tip motion here, right, is a cut, or a series of cuts and thrusts, right? Let's say that you were going to do it exactly as where am I at? There I am, right? Yep, right? And I am just going to take him, right? If my distance allows me. Now, maybe he's being very tentative, and he wants to stay far away. He wants to clear and make sure it's cleared before he moves, right? Then that's fine too, right? Because what I am doing is working my position to cut him, right? That's all I care about, is how do I cut this man down, right? So, with that, going to go ahead and show you some examples of how to use this same Kissakigaeshi motion to win, but in ways that are not demonstrated in the kata. So we've gone through the basic motions of the kata. Now we're going to look at how this Kissakigaeshi motion can be used in ways that are not shown in the kata. Because in the kata, it's very straightforward, right? The person cuts at your sword, you circle, and you cut them down, right? Or you circle, you cut them up, you cut them down, you cut them in, right? Now we're going to show how this same idea, this same relative interaction can be used, right? So let's say I'm here, he cuts, right? So what have I done? As his sword is coming at me, pop, 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 I give him that same target, I'm putting something out here for him to hit. And I take that same half step, pop, and I transposition my sword around. I make the sword rotate around the point that he wants to hit. This puts me behind this sword. It's the same kind of position, but I'm not breaking his posture by virtue of this kind of jarring motion, which brings his posture forward. I'm breaking his posture by virtue of terror backwards as he sees the sword coming, if I want him to see it, right? With this position, I can just come into the side of his neck, right? And because I'm in that area where his visual acuity isn't as great, he might not see the work, right? He'll see something happens, but then he'll be stabbed in the throat with not a real sense of where it came from or how it occurred. This is very beneficial to us. Of course, there are times where strategically we want to let a person know that they're in danger so that they react out of self-preservation and fear. But really, if you want to end the fight quickly, it's better that the other person's confident, right? You want them confident, you want them doing work, you want them coming in at you, because that's opportunity for you to end it. Now, let's say that I want to do this in another way. Maybe I'm in a low guard, right? Maybe I'm in Judan, it doesn't really matter. He comes to hit, oh, I can do the same kind of work as the Hasso block. Ba-da-da, ba-da-da. But with this feeling of suppressing him. Now I can strike with my mune to his mune, just as in Hasso uke. Or I can come in more with the sense of proceeding right into his cut, as opposed to the sort of grappling motion in the first example. So, and again, it's the same on the other side. Habara, dabara, right? It's no different. In the same way, I can come just as in the Untitled applications, right? Something that I'm hoping, now that we're several kata in, that you're beginning to see is that because the kata are all basically examples of one larger thing, just looking at it from different angles, that the work is not different. It's not like, oh, to fight this man, I'm going to use the techniques of Hasso uke, or to beat him, I must use the ancient mystic art of Mojirigamae. That's that goes back to that special move kind of thinking, which is not accurate. Instead, everything is one thing, right? It is one cohesive method, right? And once you understand that, it's just refining how you perceive the method, how accurately you see its possibilities, specifically in how you interact with your partner. So, where in the Hasso uke kata, we are very much striking the person's sword to get in a powerful cut here. we're still fundamentally bringing our sword behind their sword into the space between them and their sword, right? It's not that different from Sasen, really. It's the same, right? With the Mojirigamae, we're doing the same thing, but we're doing it quietly, softly, right? Soft does not mean limp, right? It does not.
Noodles.
It's not weak. It's not floppy. Soft is it's
passive.
It's not passive, and it's not, and it's not exactly gentle either. It is, instead of domineering, it's receptive, right? Anyway, it's another one of those things. When with the suppression, you have to feel it. With this sort of working softly, you have to feel it from yourself doing it. In other words, if I'm just sort of loose and limp, even though the position looks the same, because it physically is, I'm not going to be able to cut him well. Doesn't mean I won't win. Doesn't mean I won't cut him down safely. It just means that I am not going to do so with the kind of efficiency that I would otherwise be able to, right? So you have to study and feel it for yourself. I understand it's hard over the internet, right? But play with it and you'll get a sense. So, I think that's pretty much it for the examples of the other applications for this Kissakigaeshi work. I mean, you can do it in lots of ways, right? For instance, you can do it in what appears to be a same time hit. Let's say he comes to hit me, right? And I can do that same work. I've moved my sword into the space between his sword and him by attacking with that same, rather than my foot cross-stepping, I had my lead foot take the same distance step out to the side. Now this is more visible, right? Because it shifts your shoulders and hips more. But it still works. It's still fine, right? And you'll see it used in the Nagashi Uchikata, right? Towards the end. Or towards the middle, rather. So don't think that you have to have a circular, a mojiri, or Kissakigaeshi type motion to be using the principles that we're showing in Kissakigaeshi, or in Mojirigamae, right? But they're a very good place to start, right? That being said, the only other part that we didn't talk about so much is the hit at the end, right? Now the hit at the end is the same hit as in all of the kata so far, except for Sasen, right? Bum, 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 and I hit him here, right? So his sword is retreating back. Bah. The only difference is that I'm covering twice the distance. In other words, I've pinned his sword. But he starts to move, I start to move, and then I come in right away. This is, again, it's skill building. We've gone from where we were already in Hasso, and we follow in that half beat. Right as he starts to move, right? But now, right as he starts to move, we have to come in, bring the sword back, and bring the sword forward to strike with power. The timing here is quite difficult and very hard to get in the beginning. What I want to do is, if, let's say from the suppression, bum, 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 Eddie is going to retreat very slowly. Ba, ba, ba. So right as he starts to settle, right? In that moment that he settles is the moment I should hit him.
Comfort.
Or the moment I should make contact with him. So I have to start a little bit before to really sort of catch him off his base and catch him out of his timing. Practice. Lots of practice, lots of Fukuro shinai, right? That being a nice segue, now we'll show this work as applied with some Fukuro shinai in some free play, so you can get a sense of how it can be used. let's look at some free play work with the Fukuro shinai so you can see how this could be applied in actual fighting, right? Right? Oh. Again, when you're suppressed, right, even if you're suppressed kind of high, the danger here is very great for you, right? You have to figure out how to evade in a way that's going to protect you safely, right? If he rolls this in as he steps out, then he closes off my sword from that space behind. But if he tries to just swing at me, of course, I can catch his distance and hit him. So, a lot of people poo-poo the idea of working slowly, right? They think, oh, so slow is fine for solo practice to muscle memorization, deepening your myelin sheath, yada, yada, yada. But sparring or working randori, free play, at slower speeds will help you observe your condition. What are you doing? Where's your back? Where is your breathing? Where are your feelings? Right? How do you interact with the person? Can you push them? Can you not? Right? So it's worth doing. We're not going to do that here. But in your own training, especially in the beginning, work slow and build speed. Right? This doesn't mean take a long time building speed. Right? In a day's class, let's say you spend 30 minutes doing randori, the first 10 minutes should be kind of slowish, right? The next 10 minutes should be at a nice clip, and the last 10 minutes should be pretty rocket, right? So, there you go, right? Hup, hup, hup. Right?
Mr. Paintbrush.
Right. Well, so, he's in this position, boom. He's got the suppression. Now, where people start to really muck up the suppression is they get anxious. They think, oh my God, I've got to do a stop. Oh my God, he's thinking of some ninja bullshit. I got to do something right now. And they do an action for the sake of doing an action. This is almost always ill-advised because you're giving up your advantage that you might not even realize you have. Wait a moment, see what they do. Because for here, I cannot hit him. I can't come around to hit him without being in danger. I have to come away, right? I have to protect myself, which gives him the opportunity to follow, to maintain the initiative, and to begin to really advance his tactical position. But if you're frightened and you go, shit, I gotta do something, right? It'll fall apart. So take your time, right? Up. Thrusts are your friend, right? When you can bring the work into that straight line, where the littlest bit of body work, taitsubaki, is going to drive it into them, you develop a way to hit a person very, very quickly, right?
And it's almost cheating.
It's cheating. I don't believe in cheating. It's a fair fight because they can fairly do whatever they want, and you can fairly do whatever you want, right? But it's important to understand, while work like this is very direct, very fast, and seems almost foolproof, if you spend all your time training this straight line, very direct work, when it breaks apart, you're not going to have anything to fall back on. The fight is not prolonged enough in your training for you to develop the kind of intuitive capacities to handle more skillful opponents, right? So, in the same way, we prolong the fights in our kata because they're not fights at all, they're just textbook examples, right? In your sparring, don't be afraid of prolonging it a little bit. Make a mental note like, I got him there, right? This is how I can get him, I can hit this throat right away. But I'm going to try this thing that takes longer, that takes more time. I want to see how he's going to work with it from that distance, right? The point of kumitachi, of fighting with your swords, is not to see who is better, right? And if you are of a competitive mindset, right? This is going to seem kind of watered down to you, but in training, the purpose is to study how your work differs when you're doing it in your kata to what your feelings and your instinct drive you to do when you're under pressure, right? And then to tame those feelings and instincts and bring them into your training, right? So, a couple more examples. So I'll work from Mojirigamae. 1, 2, right? So I wait for my time, he suppressed, and now I go off to where he can't reach me. 1, 2. Because again, his range is in a circle. Here, I am in that circle. Here, I am not. But I'm not trying to hit here, I'm trying to hit here. So I can hit him, even though he cannot hit me, because our targets are different, and I've changed our relation. Right? It's not always as simple as I cross step out of the way, right? Hup, 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 hup. Whoop, bah. There you go. Right? Take your time. Breathe. Right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right? In Hyoho, our work often looks very direct, very straight line. Also, Sasen, even our Ukinagashi has a feeling of
Very forward.
Of directness, of straightness. But the truth is, our motions are this kind of spiral, circle after circle after circle. So when he cuts and we bind, right? If I push straight into him, of course he is going to try and do something, right? If instead I roll it and I move in that same circle, I can work without disrupting his energy, not his mystic energy, his kinetic energy, right? His drive. Where is his inertia pushing? I don't want to get into a pushing contest with somebody who's 50 pounds heavier than me. I'm going to lose, right? I don't have the body mass, right? So what I have to do is just as this, right? I'm not going to oppose this. I'm going to circle around it. Mojiri. As I use that torsional motion into him, right? It's just as simple as that, really. Yeah. So, with that, let's go ahead and look at some knife work, some open-handed work, so you can start to get a better sense of this motion if you're still feeling a little lost. So let's go ahead and look at some other applications for the Mojirigamae kata. Now, probably the most classic example of Mojirigamae applied to open-handed work is known mostly from Aikido, and that is Nikkyo, the second immobilization. Some people call it the Aikido hand blade. The principle is the same, right? I'm out here, I'm offering up a target to him. I've closed off his options. He can't just leave this here. Now, where before he has one tool and I have one tool to work with, he's got two tools here, and so he can use them to kind of muss with them, but he's got to handle this. So in Nikkyo, the person comes and they give you a grab, right? Boom. Now, the point here is for him to grab so that he can get this kind of flanked position and either work on my joints, work to take down, to strike me repeatedly, to start breaking my position down so that he can get behind me and work better, right? Our response to this is going to be to make that same rotational screw driving in motion and break his wrist, right? We tend to think that our wrist has a lot of mobility.
It has a lot of mobility this way.
It does. It mostly hinges palm to wrist and back to back,
The wobble hinge.
right? it does not have a lot of side to side. We perceive that it does because we're able to rotate the bones in our forearm.
Here go everywhere.
Exactly. Once you immobilize a person's forearm bones and begin to force the wrist on its side-to-side axis, it breaks very quickly. And there are lots of ways to do this. But the point here is, I've given him that target, I've made that rotation around, and I cut into his center form, right? Very easy, very simple. If you're not familiar with this work and want to learn the specific technique, I am sure that there are way better YouTube videos than mine that can break it down and lead you to success, right? But it's not the only way of applying this, right? Right. Again, if he wants to hit me, he's got to either start to position around or he's got to handle this a little bit, right? Now, if he chooses to handle it, he chooses to try and knock it away, right? I can come around, ba, ba, ba. I use that same type of sabaki from my hips, koshi, right?
All in the hips.
To strike him hard, right? Because again, I've left this out, right? Ba, to work, right? Now, it's not to say that he can't counter with his other hand or pull up. It's not about use this one technique that all boxers hate. No, it's just an example of the motion, right? Whether or not it will succeed will depend, of course, on your opponent's skill level, your skill level, and how you have related to the opponent, right? So, what are some other simple examples?
You just punched the dude.
I know, right? You just punch him, right? It's not that hard. So let's say that I'm working down here, like we would in kind of gate on, right? I'm giving him a clear open path. The clear open path is kind of another way of giving him bait, except instead of my arm, my face is my bait, right? I'm giving something, I've closed off my lower guards, kind of. He's not really working these kidneys or liver or diaphragm too much. He wants to start hitting that face, right? And again, I can hit below. I can start to break down his tools, break into his ribs,
Not the ribs.
as I go, right? But remember, there are other parts to this. If he's trying to hit me, right? This ability to take this half step, right? Same thing if we're fighting sort of closed hips. Closed hips means if the lines of our hips could kind of face each other, right? If the lines of our hips don't face each other, we're sort of open-hipped. It's useful as a speaking tool, but tactically it's not super important unless you're trying to sort of puzzle piece in specific techniques that only work on this foot or only work in this relation, right? So, yeah, if my feet are reversed, I'm sort of southpaw and he does the same kind of punch, then it's the same sort of way, right? Right, a little closer, a little closer in range, right? So that I can move in and I let him travel the distance, right? I let him do the work.
Because I wanted to get through.
Right. You're not sitting here like, I hit you.
No.
Right. I mean, there are times that you do when you're trying to drive the opponent for distance, like with a jab or whatever. But again, you can't possibly do something for every conceivable scenario. It's not about, what about this scenario? Well, here's the answer. It's about studying the concept and learning to apply it to many different scenarios, right? Let's see. Let's say I want to play more defensive. I want to work in that kind of after time, right? So he's working, I'm kind of protecting myself. He punches, right? And I'm shucking it. Maybe he's punching again, right? Well, and I hit in that half beat. His hit hits, right? I take it, he starts to move it, boom. And I start to pin. Again, my goal here is not just to create pain and discomfort. It's to take this fist
That's coming here.
out of alignment to my face using a combination of the hit and my arm as kind of a cam surface. So again, I've given him this bait. Whoop. right? And as that hit comes, whoop, I move, right? Every time he strikes, I try and position myself with good posture, right? Because what I want to avoid is this kind of work, right?
Now you're half
to where I'm bent a little in my lower lumbar arc. Now this seems very small, and you'd say, oh, it's better to do not be hit, right? Yeah, sure. Maybe, right? It depends on the guy, right? And how much fortitude you have. But when your posture starts to break down, you're retarding your ability to make that next motion efficiently. You're retarding your ability to put power into your opponent. It's not saying that, like, oh, I now magically hit like nothing, right? It's just saying that you're having to spend more effort to get less done. Now, people are kind of fragile, so in some respects, it doesn't take much to get the work done. But when the other person's trying to work you, you have a lot that you're dealing with already, so it's not like you're working at your full capacity either. So it's best just to be kind of a little bit miserly with your endurance, right? With your posture. Do the least amount of work so that when he's hitting, when he's working, whether you're protecting yourself or whatever, your posture is straightish, right? You don't let it get too far out. It's not saying that you can't lean, right? But if you lean, right? Lean with your legs, you see. So this is still a straight line. Don't lean with your shoulders.
Don't break the tree of the body.
Straight line from your tailbone to the tip of your head. It's very, very important, right? So let's look at some of this work with the knives. Now, the Russian martial arts, they have a great little piece of knife work that is almost textbook for this, right? You offer your hand up, right?
Oh, that's just dirty.
And you kush. You don't kushi behind me. You Kissakigaeshi. Right? Now, of course, again, we're creatures with two hands. We can work in lots of ways. I can come to the outside, right? Just as I would if I was trying to mimic the Haritsuke kata, right? Or I can come to the inside against the radial artery, just as if I was trying to mimic ukinagashi, right? If I want, right? I can do Mojirigamae on the opposite side, the same way we do in the Kodachi Seiho, the short sword work, right? The principles are simple. One, cut the dude with every motion, right? Two, you can narrow the field of their probable attacks by offering them something juicy, right? Right. Three, any motion that you make can be an attack at pretty much every stage of the motion, right? Up, down, through, right? Every direction I move my body, whether I have, this knife is fine, right? Right? Whether I have a tool or not, right? I have to get out of the way. That just gives me motion and power to strike with. And if I'm stingy with that, right? I don't want to spend energy to move and then energy to strike. I work so that every time I move, because I have to move first, right? Movement is the key here. If I just stand still, it doesn't matter how good I am, right? He's going to get me, right? Because he's already perceived the space that I am. In his ODAA loop, he's chosen, I'm going to hit this fucker, right? And so when he comes, yeah, boom, I give him information right away that his work did not fail. Why? Because rather than being soft and kind, right, I'm being hard, poof. His posture doesn't break, he works right into me, right? Because he doesn't have to take time to go, where'd he go, George? Where'd he go? He already knows I'm right there. He doesn't have to think about it. He can just go, fist go, knife go, fist go, knee go, right? because I don't step, I make his work easier for him. In contrast, right, he's cutting at me or whatever, oh. And by moving around, I force him to have to go, okay, he's over here, okay, he's over here, okay, he's over here. And it slows him down a little bit, right? Where you really notice it is in working against somebody that's using a knife, right? Because otherwise, they seem very fast, because the knife is frightening, right? We think of it like this horrible, like, oh, right? And it's very far, especially if somebody is used to using it in a controlled way, and they're not just like, right? Yeah, it's murder aerobics, right? When you start to break down their ideal position, where they want to be. They want to be where they can see you, where they can use all their tools, and where you cannot work on them in a safe manner for yourself, right? When you force them to change that even a little, up, can't use all my tools, gotta turn. Yeah. Up, can't use all my tools, gotta turn. You start to break apart these other parts too. Now he can't assume that I can't attack without being in danger, because he doesn't have all of his tools to respond to that, right? I improve my tactical position with each set, slowly but surely. And of course, if I have the ma'ai to be able to hit him with each one of those steps, I will, right? Even if it's something like this, right? Boom! And I'll start to work to take down his tools so that he becomes more and more reticent to throw things out, right? I let him know that this is going to hurt. This is going to hurt the entire time. Maybe he's going to kill me, but he is going to suffer, because death is an end, right? It's like, oh, well, I guess I'm going to die. I don't have to worry about too much anymore, right? So long, student loans. Suffering is different, right?
Suffering is a long thing.
Exactly. It's like, you know, you might break your bone and be like, ah, shit, right? And then it gets set and you're like, oh, shit. But it's fine-ish, because it's brief, right? But then you have an 8-hour headache. Pain is much less, but it's much less bearable, too, because of its extension. It's suffering. And humans are imaginative creatures, right? We live a lot of our lives in our head, and it's important to capitalize on that in your opponent, right? He already wants to believe the worst thing's going to happen because he's anxious, right? Because he's scared. All we have to do is oblige that feeling, right? We want to give him some proof, right? So that he starts to go, hey, I am going to suffer here. I am going to hurt. You start breaking bones rather than just hitting nicely, right? You start taking every opportunity to force him to fall backwards so that his mind isn't going, I'm going forward. It's going, ow, 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 you know. Because it doesn't matter if he's bigger and stronger and has every advantage in the world, right? I can be the little nasty chihuahua, right? Biting at his ankles, chewing at his toes, and I can drive him back, and I can win and prevail, right? So, that is,
throw it in.
I don't know that more examples are going to make this work clearer for you guys. You either have it, or you need to work, right? And you probably have to work regardless. But as always, you know, if you want to understand this work, you have to pick up a sword and go train.